So why is it that we suffer? I call it the tyranny of the ego and our false narrative. It's self-created. The Buddha said it very well. Pain is required of our existence. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. We're gonna scrape our knees. We're gonna incur pain. It's a painful process. This idea of being alive, being in this remarkably beautiful world, it comes with growing pains, and each one of those pains is going to happen, and it needs to. But the suffering that we incur on ourselves afterwards is optional, and it's all very much manageable, and it's created. So the root of suffering is attachment, right? So Buddha said that as well. It's our attachment to something being true, something being right, or something being a certain way, right? Probably the nastiest word that we have in our language is should. Things should be a certain way. That creates more suffering than anything else in the world, because you cannot control the way things are in the world around us, right? The only thing that we can control is our response to the circumstances, the events that we come up against. We can control how we view the world, how we perceive the world, sure, but we cannot control what other people are doing with their own worlds, right? We talked about this idea of the dreaming happening. We dream our world into existence, so we all have these little mini worlds. In fact, we have 8 billion of these things wandering around the planet right now. And so it's no wonder that there's conflict. It's no wonder that there's suffering, because the idea that the world should be a certain way is never going to work, because you're going to have to get all 8 billion worlds to agree on the way that things should be. It's just simply not going to happen. And so what do we have to do in order to live a life that's fulfilled, live a life of contentment, of happiness, of joy, of abundance? We have to understand that there is no should, right? There can be things that we're hardline on, sure, but that attachment to a specific outcome, to a specific expectation, is only going to create the possibility of suffering in the future. But suffering, for all of the negatives that there is, it's not the boogeyman, right? I think it's a doorway to personal evolution, personally, to growth, to expansion. We just have to choose how we perceive it and learn how to shift our energy to modify our thoughts and our perceptions so that we don't incur extra suffering, right? That's what the Buddha was talking about. It's going to hurt, right? But whether or not we choose to be stuck in that hurt is the suffering that we're trying to get rid of, so that we can have the energy, the personal power to change our lives. So let's talk about what it is that is at the root of suffering. So the first one is resistance to change, right? We live in an impermanent world. The world is constantly in flux, constantly changing, and this is why shoulds never work out, because the world is always going to flip the script. It's always going to change what's going on here. It's never going to stay the exact same. That's not how growth happens, right? And if we resist that change, if we resist the way that the world is, then we're going to find ourselves suffering more and more and more. We need to understand that the only thing that we can control is our reaction. Change is uncertain, but it's not necessarily bad. And it certainly doesn't give us security. And shoulds give us security. The should, this is how things should be. I can control this. This is what the ego wants to do because it wants to keep us safe. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we've gotten here. But understanding, being aware of when the ego takes over and when our subconscious programming takes over, versus looking at it through a more conscious lens and understanding, am I able to take over and flip these two things, right? Am I just 100% being driven by this need for security, this need for things to be the way that I think they should be? Another one is the illusion of separateness, that we are individual units, right? Again, so we're talking about these 8 billion plus different worlds, right? We all have our own unique perspective, our own particular point of consciousness. But to think for a second that point of consciousness is not related in some way to all of the other 8 billion or the different things that we interact with in the world creates a number of ways where we can suffer. This idea that we're separate from nature has caused untold suffering for humankind ever since the beginning. This idea that we're somewhere above nature, or that because we have this very unique gift of self-awareness, that the way that we do, that we're somehow above nature or not subject to the world, the universe as it is, meaning that we can fabricate our own lives and build outside of this construct, this universe, is something that creates a great deal of strife, distrust, and distance between people, creating relationships that are not founded on good principles, but founded on distrust. I mean, just for lack of a better term. This is where, like, presence, the art of meditation, come in, allowing ourselves to be steeped in that oneness, to realize that our little story, our personal narrative, is limiting us in some way. How can we tap into this connected web of energy if we can kind of accept the principle that we know now from science and that we've known from ancient mystery teachings for thousands upon thousands of years? Everything is connected, and everything is relationship in some way. So our relationship to food, our relationship to our family, our relationship to our society, our relationship to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, all interconnected. Now, if we just decide to live within the confines of our story, of our narrative, then we're not going to be able to tap into that infinite amount of energy around us, right? We're not going to be able to tap into the truth that it's not just our little picture that we have here, not our little point of consciousness, but that we are connected in a larger way to something much greater than ourselves. It's that connection to universal love that can envelop us and make us feel protected, even though we feel a little bit vulnerable. So there's this other idea that I want to get to real quick, the false you. Clinging to our identity is probably the strongest reason why we suffer, and how we suffer is the attachment to who we think we are. It's a collection of labels, of judgments, expectations, assumptions, and all of these things that have coalesced into this little creature sitting before you, right? Here, me, Christopher Lee, master life coach, super spiritual guy, right? All these things that I've accepted as being me. Now, none of these things necessarily are bad, right? It's not bad to have labels. It's not bad to have judgments. It's not bad to have expectations or assumptions about the way things are. That's part of life, but it is managing the ones that are healthy, the ones that build you up, the ones that give you energy, versus those that immediately leave you feeling drained of your power. Are these collections, these narratives, these labels that have been given to you really true? Right? So there's certain things that we go through life accepting. This is a table. We all agreed on that. Fine. We can move on from that one. But what about that one where your parents said they couldn't believe you got this grade, or that you've been so stupid, right? You know, not everybody's parents said that they were stupid. I got that. But what about those moments? Those moments where you accepted something that came from outside of you, something external, that was a judgment about you and the way that you are in the world. How many of those do we have lingering in the background in our subconscious programming that are still active, still taking away power, right? It's kind of like when you open up a computer and you go to your task manager and you have all these hidden programs draining all the CPU, the GPU on your computer. We're not very different as far as how our neural pathways work, right? We can shift them, we can turn some off, we can reattach them to new things so we can take some of that power back. But it's first realizing which one of those subroutines is draining us of our power. And a lot of that can come via our identity. So it's good to identify the areas in which your identity is holding you back. Where can you find a piece of the identity that just doesn't seem right? You know which ones they are. They're the ones that we don't like about ourselves, the ones that we've hidden away, sometimes called the shadow. Those things are the way in which we can start to identify where we're causing needless suffering. This one here is another great point. Misunderstanding reality. Accepting things as they are can be very difficult for people. There's the world as it is, and the world as we think it should be. I've kind of already touched on this. The issue here is the world's never going to be that way. So it's not going to be static. It's not going to be unchanging. That would be boring, and it wouldn't be worth living most of the time. And that may be my own personal judgment on it. But I think that if you're gonna want to try and control the world around you without controlling the world within you, you're going to create a situation where it's a no-win proposition. So we need to understand that the world as we know it is very much different than the story that we've accepted about it or that we've created to make ourselves feel comfortable. But what we can do is maintain some control over our personal world. So let's talk about the you've been told to be. We kind of touched on it with other people. It's a conversation of their truth versus your truth. Now, this is a topic that's very popular right now, speaking your truth. How much of that truth that is being broadcast right now on social media everywhere is actually that person's truth? Or is it something they've accepted because of a peer group or a label that they've decided to be with, a community they wanted to engage in? That's not the kind of truth I'm talking about. We have thousands upon thousands of truths in our subconscious programming that are given to us by society, by our peer groups, by our families. What a family is supposed to be like, or what a family's supposed to do, what friends are supposed to be like, and how they're supposed to treat us, what the world is supposed to be like, and what rules we're supposed to follow. Right? You see a lot of this dissonance right now, particularly in the world, where everybody is sharing their truth. But a lot of that truth is not coming from within. It's not coming from a place of personal power. In fact, it's coming from a place that drains them. That's why people get into these arguments all the time with family members over politics or over, the latest and greatest hits of strife socially. Do you ever go into those arguments on Facebook or on social media and you're sitting there typing away, bam, 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 yeah, I got you, I'm right. Do you ever feel empowered by that? No, because nobody's budging in these arguments. In fact, all we're doing is draining ourselves of our personal power. And the reason that we're creating this suffering is because we're not acting in alignment with our truth, the deeper truth within us. And the only way we can find that is by finding some way to identify what those truths are. And that takes a little bit more work. It takes the art of presence to find the space, to create the space, to create the container, to realize our full power. It doesn't come from external cherry pickings that we make out and we put into this nice little package and we say, boom, that's my truth. That's my collection of labels. That's not how this works.